Michael had always thought his older brother Jared was strange, but no one could have imagined the darkness that lived behind his calm eyes. Their small town was quiet, the streets empty by 10 p.m., but the moment Michael stepped into his house, an unsettling feeling crept over him. Shadows seemed to linger longer than they should, and the faint sound of whispering echoed through the halls, though he was certain he was alone. It began subtly. Objects would shift when no one was watching. The lights flickered without reason, and Michael often felt cold drafts brushing past him, as if invisible hands were tracing his skin. Jared always smiled, unnervingly calm, never acknowledging the changes. Michael tried to rationalize it. Maybe the house was old. Maybe he was imagining things. But deep down, he knew something was off. One night, Michael awoke to a soft, rhythmic tapping. The sound came from Jared's room. He approached cautiously. But when he peered inside, the room was empty, the bed neatly made. The tapping continued, now louder, more urgent, as though demanding attention. Michael's heart pounded. He whispered Jared's name. Silence. Over the next few days, Michael noticed a pattern. Every time he felt unsafe, Jared was nearby. But his presence was different. It was as if the air around him thickened, carrying an unseen weight. Michael started keeping a journal, noting every strange occurrence. The entries grew darker. Shadows moving independently, whispers forming unintelligible words, a sense of being watched even outside the house. One evening, Michael followed Jared into the basement. The room was cold, darker than the rest of the house. The walls seemed to pulse subtly, as if breathing. Jared stood still, his eyes reflecting the dim light. "Do you see them?" Jared asked, his voice calm but eerie. Michael squinted into the darkness, and for a brief moment he thought he saw shadowy figures, crouched, crawling along the corners. Michael tried to speak, but no words came out. The shadows moved closer, silent yet menacing. Jared raised a hand, and the figures paused. Then, just as suddenly, they vanished. Michael gasped, staggering back. They follow you," he stammered. Jared only smiled, tilting his head. "Not me," he whispered. "You." The following nights brought restless sleep. Michael awoke to whispers in his ear, soft but chilling. "We're always here, watching, waiting." He realized the shadows weren't confined to the basement. They moved through the house, unseen yet omnipresent. Every door he opened, every room he entered, the sensation of being hunted intensified. Desperation grew. Michael attempted to confront Jared, demanding answers, but Jared's calm demeanor never wavered. "You don't understand," he said, his voice low. "They've always been with us, with me, and now, with you." Panic surged through Michael. He wanted to run, to leave the house forever, but something rooted him in place. One night, Michael saw the shadows clearly for the first time. They were humanoid, distorted, their forms writhing unnaturally. Their eyes glowed faintly, and their movements were both deliberate and erratic. Jared watched with detached amusement. "You can't escape them," he said. Michael tried to scream, but his voice was swallowed by the oppressive darkness. By the 10th night, Michael had changed. Sleep-deprived and terrified, he felt the shadows growing stronger. They whispered his fears, his secrets, amplifying his anxiety. Jared stood silently beside him, a guide into a world Michael never knew existed. And as the house seemed to close in around him, he realized one horrifying truth. The shadows were not only real, they were hungry, patient, and now they had claimed him. The following morning, Michael awoke to a thick, suffocating fog that had seeped into his room. The shadows were no longer confined to the corners. They swirled in the corners of his vision, whispering names he didn't recognize, chanting words that made his skin crawl. He stumbled out of bed, heart racing, and saw Jared calmly sitting at the kitchen table, a faint smile playing on his lips. "They're hungry tonight," Jared said, stirring his coffee as if discussing the weather. Panic clawed at Michael's chest, but his voice caught in his throat. Michael tried to leave the house, but the front door seemed impossibly distant. Each step he took felt longer, heavier, as though invisible hands were dragging him back. The whispers grew louder, now mixed with faint laughter, hollow and cold. When he looked behind him, the shadows were not shadows anymore. They had shape, contorted humanoid forms with glowing, pale eyes, inching closer with impossible speed. Jared followed silently, watching, always watching. In a desperate attempt, Michael grabbed a flashlight and headed to the basement. He hoped the bright beam would reveal the figures clearly. The basement was darker than before, the walls pulsating with an unnatural rhythm. The shadows moved along the walls in erratic patterns, stretching and shrinking, almost playing with him. Michael's hand shook as he shone the light onto the floor, revealing strange symbols etched into the concrete. Symbols that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly. Suddenly, a low, guttural hum vibrated through the house, shaking the walls and the air. The shadows froze mid-motion, as if listening. Michael's breath came in ragged gasps. Jared stepped forward calmly, almost merging with the darkness. "They don't just follow, they choose," he whispered, his voice eerily emotionless. The shadows advanced, enveloping Michael in an oppressive blackness, and he realized with horror that leaving the house alive might no longer be an option. The end. Night fell heavier than ever. Michael felt the shadows pressing against him from all sides, their cold presence crawling up his arms and legs. Each whisper now carried a name. Friends, neighbors, strangers, making him dizzy with fear. He tried to scream, but only a strangled croak escaped. The walls of the house seemed to pulse like a living creature, and the floor beneath him vibrated subtly, as if the house itself was breathing. Jared stood silently, his calm face belying the terror surrounding them. Michael darted into the hallway, the shadows darting after him with fluid, unnatural motion. Doors slammed shut, one after another, trapping him in a corridor that seemed to twist and elongate endlessly. He felt cold fingers brush against his neck, tugging at his clothes, at his skin. Each step became a struggle, his legs heavy as lead. The whispers escalated into distorted voices, chanting incomprehensible words, and Michael realized the house had learned his fears. It was feeding on them, growing stronger with each heartbeat. He reached the attic, hoping to find some refuge. The beams above groaned under an invisible weight. Shadows pooled in the corners, moving independently from their owners. In the center of the room lay a large, blackened mirror reflecting not Michael, but twisted versions of him, hollow-eyed, gaunt, and twisted in unnatural poses. He stumbled back in horror, hearing a whisper from the reflection itself. "You belong." Now, his heartbeat raced as he realized the shadows were no longer content to follow. They wanted to merge, to consume. As dawn neared, a fleeting calm settled over the house, deceptive and fragile. Michael leaned against the wall, shaking and breathless, trying to piece together the fragments of the night. Jared approached, almost merging with the shadows, and said softly, "They are patient, and so are we." The whispers receded slightly, but Michael knew this reprieve was temporary. The house and its dark inhabitants waited, biding their time for the next moment when fear could be fully harvested. And in that realization, Michael understood leaving was no longer the only challenge. Surviving, with his mind intact, was the true test.